Hey guys, I'm Little Art Demon and welcome to my channel. And how are you doing today? Are you feeling good? I hope so, and thank you for clicking in this video because today I'll dive into a topic that may help with your stories. In this video I'll show you a little bit of the things I do for creating my fictional species for my stories. I'll show you a few different examples and hopefully they will help you. This is not a direct continuation of the video where I talk about creating your fantasy world, but they definitely complement each other. So if you like these videos, don't forget to subscribe and leave a like because there'll probably be more in the future. But let's get into this one. The first thing I'd like to point out is that there are a few different ways to create your fantasy species, but at least to me I like to put them on a spectrum. On one end we have the ones that you create purely by your imagination, and on the other end we have the real fantasy creatures. And that probably makes zero sense, so let me explain. The first end is when you have an original idea for a creature. Of course there will be inspirations from other works, either consciously or unconsciously, but it's when you try to create something new. It's when you create all the rules for that creature and their lore, even if sometimes they can match certain aspects with some other species from other creations. They share those aspects not because you were trying to directly reflect those creations, but because you decided to make them part of yours. And on the other end is when you pick creatures that exist in the real mythology and try to keep it as true as possible. For example, let's say you want to create a story about vampires, but you want those vampires to be based on the original tales of vampirism. So you research those and take notes of the preset rules, and then you fill in the gaps that need to be filled and work with that. These species most times will take place in stories that portray our real world with those added aspects to it. These are the two ends of the spectrum, but I usually work somewhere in the middle. And in this video I'll demonstrate how the same base idea can branch out into two completely different ways. The example I'll be using is werewolves because they are featured in two different stories of mine, each of them leaning closer to one side of the spectrum. The first one is from my mythology story, and in that universe I'm trying to include as much mythical creatures that I possibly can. So I'm doing a lot of research on mythologies from different countries and cultures and try to understand and learn about these awesome creatures while being respectful. When it came to werewolves, I knew I wanted to include them because they are a classic. And even though almost everyone is familiar with the idea of a werewolf, I did my research. Their tales are predominant in Europe, and the tales talk about someone who can turn into a wolf either on purpose or because they were cursed or even bitten by another werewolf. And as many of us have heard, they transform in the full moon. So I grabbed those informations and looked at the universe I'm trying to create. I won't be giving a lot of information about the story itself, but basically in that universe all of these fantastical creatures exist, but they are all hiding. No human knows about their existence. And werewolves are one of the species that's hiding in plain sight, meaning that they live among humans but also have safe spaces away from humanity to be free as werewolves. And while being truthful to the original material that inspired them, I adapted them to fit my story. In that universe these creatures are magical, and the magic has somewhat of a connection with space. The magic werewolves have is the ability to change their appearance from human to wolf, or a mix of the two of them, but they are neither human or wolf. They weren't cursed, this is just their species. But as I said, the magic is connected to space in some degree. And theirs is connected to the moon, obviously. So their powers are charged by the light of a full moon. Then the aspects of their society were fully made up by myself. I took inspiration from different things, but they weren't taken from the original werewolf tales. If you want to read a little bit more about that, you can check my Patreon, it's there for free and there's some other creatures too. I did stop uploading them there because it was getting a little bit crazy to work all the details in time, but they're still there if you want to check them out. But in my personal notes I also fleshed out some more details of their society. Werewolves are very centered about their family and society in general, they live in packs, let's put it that way. And they usually raise the kids as a group, everyone helps everyone. There are some costumes they have in special days that I'm still adding details to, but they love to go camping and spend time in nature. I also added some other abilities that are just things that wolves can do that humans can't. For example, they have better senses of hearing and smelling and can talk to wolves. As far as I can say, these aren't things that were depicted in the old stories, but I did try to fit that aspect in the historical factor. In this universe, all the myths we have about this type of things were based on real sightings of the magical creatures, and then the human brain tried to fill the missing pieces and fit them into the beliefs already preset in the person who saw the magic. So when I'm figuring out lore, I try to ask, if I saw this, would I retell it in the way that was told in the stories? And just go off from there. One of the things that I think most people have at least heard about were the witch trials, and while researching I learned that there were also werewolf trials. And I imagine that all that was emphasized by a real group of werewolves being discovered and then everything got out of hand really quickly. As you can see, this is setting place in a world we are already familiar with, but there's magic hiding among us. so I try to align our real-world story with the fantasy aspects I want to include in this. I definitely took a lot of creative liberties and changed some things, but they still follow some of the rules of the real legends and myths. I would say this story is more in the middle of the spectrum, but a little bit towards the real part. Before going to the second story I have that includes werewolves, I think I should also point out what a story more towards the real side of the spectrum would look like. I don't have any other stories with werewolves in it, I believe, but there are a lot of paranormal stories out there. I can't give you names, but an example of a storyline that would fit true myths would probably follow our main character as they get cursed and can't resist to turn into a wolf in the full moon. They would probably be confused about what's happening to them and have few to no memories of the events they went through as a wolf, just randomly waking up in a different place and seeing the aftermath of all the chaos they caused during the night. That would follow most, if not all, of the rules werewolves follow in the original myths, at least from what I gathered from my research. But moving on to my other story that has a werewolf-like creature, it's the same story I talked about in the video about creating the fantasy world. And I think I mentioned in that video that there are a few different species. There are witches, demons, specters and shapeshifters in that universe. But when I started there were just witches. But then I decided to include some of the other paranormal creatures that I love, and in that moment there are witches, vampires, ghosts and werewolves. Those are still very rooted in our perception of what is a paranormal creature, they're well known and classics. But they weren't quite fitting the story, so I ended up using those as just one source of inspiration. Then I looked into other ideas I think are cool and mix and match them to fit my liking, and they shifted to where they are now. So as you may have connected, the werewolves are now shapeshifters because they aren't necessarily wolves. I'm still not sure about what species to include, but they still follow some of the rules of werewolves. They are human looking but can transform into their respective animal, and they have some small traits from their animal form that may give away what they are. So a werewolf fits into this category, but it's not exclusive to them. I expanded on the concept and adapted to my fantasy world. Then I followed the process of asking all the questions, sketching out the ideas and all that fun stuff that I talked about in the other video. And that's how I create the species for my stories. I do the research and then I pick what I keep and what I change and then just figure out the details. But unfortunately that's all I have time for today. I've been spending all my free time working on the animatics, so my time for this video is very limited, and so it's a little bit shorter. I did some werewolf sketches for the speed paint, but next week there will be more detailed drawings. But I hope you still liked the video. If you did, leave a like and comment down below which of the species I talked about today seems more interesting. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't yet, and thank you so much for watching. I appreciate it, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!